Hello, and welcome to a walkthrough of MYOB Greentree and the Query Designer. So what is Query Designer? So Query Designer was released in the 2019.3.0 release. That's the June 2019 release. How to sum this up in a few lines. To create database queries based on a drag and drop functionality and able to export the results into different or multiple formats, as well as exposing the query to ODBC so it can be used outside of Greentree. So let's look at some general concepts and some terminology that's introduced before we look at the functionality itself. View Builder. So this is about building the set of data that you want to put the query on. It can be used in its own right, but you'll see in a few moments how that's used. Query Builder. So create or amend queries that you've created from the set of data in the view. All sounds a bit waffly, but you'll see in a few minutes. So multiple queries can effectively be run off the same view / set of data. Results Viewer. So this is what the user sees. So this is a way of publishing the results out there without giving people access to either the Query Builder or the View Builder screens. Running the query. So not really a concept or terminology, but the process of running the query, building your data set, is done through the print and task queue, making it much quicker and more efficient way of doing it. Security. As you'll see, with the view and with the query, these can be assigned to team or teams or user or users, making it much more easy to assign the same queries or views to multiple people. Query Designer Manager. So again, we've got all these views we've built. We've potentially got all these queries that we've built on the views. How are we going to maintain these? How do we know which ones we've got? So there's a Query Designer Manager to help us with this. Import Export. So again, as we can do with alerts and approvals, with Workflow Desks, with Windows Designer, and now with Query Designer, we can import and export both views and queries. So again, the concept of building these up, getting what you want within a test system, and then exporting them and then importing them into a live system. Or to take it to the other example, the other example, you can build up a library of them between different companies, different customers over time to have quite a suite, for want of a better word, of both views and queries. Okay, like all these things, it's where do we start? Where is Query Designer? Okay, screenshot here of where it is, and then we'll talk through each bit. System, Utilities, Query Designer. And there you'll see some of that terminology that I've talked about. The Query Builder, the View Builder, the Results Viewer, exposing it to ODBC, and the Manager. Okay. If you have any questions at the end of this video, there's my email address. Feel free to get in contact. But in the meantime, let's go and have a look in more detail. In the first section, I'm going to look at the View Builder. So the concept here is we're building our set of data that we're going to run queries off. The view can be used on its own. We don't have to build queries off it. So this is where you might do your more straightforward views, sets of data, etc. So you give something a name, a description, and then you look at the class that you're querying on. Let's have a look at one that I've got here already. Customers. So this one I've just called customer. I've given it a longer description and I've chosen the customer class. So as I mentioned earlier, this is about a drag and drop. So I can simply add more to the end if I want. I wanted to put the alpha in. I can simply drag that across. I've realized that I've put alpha in the wrong place. So I can move alpha up and down accordingly. Let's just have a look what that looks like. I'm just going to run it. It tells me I've made a change. I've got a little something else going on there, but that's fine. We'll explain that shortly. So there's my query, or my view, sorry. This is my view. I can export this data if I want to, the same as I have been able to before. Over here, I've got my fields, as you saw I just pulled across that alpha. The difference now is that I can search on things here. I want to bring a tree in. You'll see that we've now got tree at the end of it. I can bring those across. We'll talk about trees a bit more and how that works a bit more when I create a query from this view. You'll notice here that I've also got permissions. So as well as just using this view as a set of data that I might want to export, I can also assign this view so different users or teams, I can make it available for all, can see it. And here we go. So there's my list of users. Is it available? Am I allowed to edit it? Fairly self-explanatory as to what you can do there. So within this, some other functionality I can do in my view. I want to look at, in this instance, my credit limits. So really useful feature now. I can just bring that across. Let's have a look at my credit limits. But now what I can do, I can go, okay, in my total function, I want to get an average of what my credit limits are. And I want to compare that to what's outstanding. So there's my outstanding total there. So I'm going to bring that across. And I want to total that up. And I'm going to change that to be grand total. And I've lost the ability to spell. So let's just save that. So I don't get that message. Refresh and run it. Just expand that a bit. So what you'll see here, I've got an average going on and a grand total of what's outstanding. I can flick through those. I can still have this concept of drilling on these if I want to. You'll notice the blue. These are different company records. Can't drill. Yeah, we'll get on to limiting companies, limiting data when I go to create my query. But in this instance, I've used some additional functionality to just add some up. What also is introduced at this view stage, I just want to get rid of those, and I'm just doing standard green tree shift F2 to get rid of those. As I might want to look at some dates that are here. I've got a create date. But now I'm going to go into this create date, and I might have different functionality along the lines of what day was it created, what was the day name, what was the month, and what was the month name. Now at this point you might be saying, well, that's okay, I could do functionality like that in Excel, but I could be using like last modified dates, etc. when I come to do my queries that are coming out of there. But I'm just showing that we can go down to an additional level within those, and you now see I've got a back to take me back up to the next level. Let's just save that. And I'm going to run that just to show you. So I'm now saying it was created. I didn't bring the year in. I didn't want to in this example, but I could have. So it's Thursday on February. I could be looking at some kind of metrics as to what was going on there. Fairly simplistic example, I know. So this is creating my view. I've created a view here on my set of customers. You'll notice here that this class has stayed here. That's deliberate. Let's wipe the whole lot again. So that's deliberate because you may want to create another view. You notice here that I've got a couple here for customers. I've also got one for organizations as well. Fairly straightforward. I've done with this one just a name and code. And you'll see that there's one data view. This is showing that there's one data view on this class. I talked about export and imports. Here's these buttons here. These are the same buttons that you'll see on the Windows Designer. So I can export this view and import a view. Okay, that's it for views at this stage. In this section, I want to concentrate on building the query, introducing runtime variables and how to use them, and introducing parameters and how we can use those. So first of all, let's build a basic query. Query builder. So the query is going to, or queries, is going to be based on the view that I have already created. So in this instance, it was customers. So again, I'm going to give it a name and a longer description. And what's the class that it's focused on? In my example here, it's customer. Okay. Just going to save that as we've done before and run it. Okay, so some full disclosure here from the view that I did earlier. I have introduced the company code. Now I've introduced the company code purely in terms of showing in this example how it's bringing in all my customers from all my companies in my demo system here. Because what I'm going to do by way of a runtime variable is first of all is limit out this company code. I want to bring in as way or by the means of a runtime variable just the company I'm in, because I might switch between companies. So in this instance, I want to introduce company 1 for no particular reason. So in here, through my AR control, again, I'm using that search to find it. And then I want you'll notice there that I'm just using that. So I want to say that that company is equal to, in my runtime variables there, we've got some options that we've introduced. Current user, well, you can read those for yourself, but I'm just going to say that. Yeah. Save it. What's the query I'm running it on? And bring it back. So there you'll see now, first of all, why I introduced that company code into my view. So I can show them that query there, and therefore that's bringing it through. Now again, so with the introduction of that runtime variable, I'm not actually putting a value in. I'm not saying where company code equals 01. I'm just saying where my company equals the current company. So depending on your query, that runtime may or may not be relevant. That'll depend on what your query is doing, but that's an example of a use of that runtime variable. Okay. I just want to take that away. Do I want to remove that condition? Yes, I do, please. Okay. I'll just bring back my query. The other thing I want to do, more standard functionality within the query, is just to build up some selection criteria of what's going on. I want to look at some trees. I want to bring in customers in a certain tree range. Now you'll notice in that data elements, I've just introduced the word, typed in the word tree. That's bringing in my trees. In the instance where in the past where we may have used jQuery or Explorer, you couldn't do that. I want to bring in this region. So again, just using the drag and drop, be familiar with this kind of selection. I'm going to look at Victoria, for example, in terms of a state, and all my export import customers. Eventually get it right. I'll save that, and I'll run it on that. And now I'm limiting it down. Again, remember, I can export the results here. If I wanted to bring that tree in, I would need to do that as part of my view. But I might just be doing some selection criteria. You'll notice here I've got and or. I can switch that. I can show the query. What's the actual query that's going on? I can add a subgroup under that. I can remove the subgroup. So I can start introducing some further queries within there or further selection criteria, depending what it is. I can also overwrite things. So let's say I'm going to bring in my customer type, bring it over the top. It's saying, okay, what do you want to do with that? Do you want to add it, replace it? So there's a bit of a warning message going on there. Okay, I'm going to remove that for my next example. So I can build up that selection criteria and have almost nested selection criteria going on in there. I want to introduce parameters in here. So I can create my parameters, which I can then run against my query. So this is just another way of doing it. I can do it as part of my. So what I want to do is I'm going to go into my parameters tab. I'm going to put a customer range in. So I'm going to call this customer from. It's going to be a string, and you'll see how this works in a second. If you haven't already, customer to, it's a string. And I'm just going to go like that for the moment. But what you'll notice here, I've created those. It's put the parameters over here. I'm just going to save it. Come back to my query. What am I actually going to query? I haven't actually told it at this point what those fields, my parameters are. I want to look at my code. So again, I use that data elements to bring it in, code. On my parameter, and we're going to go is greater than or equal to, and I'm going to use my parameters there, drag it across, add another line, bring that in, and I'm going to say is less than or equal to, back to my parameters. So I could have a range of parameters there. I don't have to use them all in that individual query. I could use them in a set of queries. So let's just run this query to see how that works. So there's my query options presented to me. So I might want to say, I only want, that's why I wasn't too fixed on those numbers there. I'm going to from 0 to that. Okay, I've knocked out my company on this, and I've knocked out that tree. So again, it's going to bring them all back. But I could still have my runtime variable in there, limiting that company. Or I could simply have a selection criteria saying, and company code is equal to 01. But that you'll see from those results that that company range doesn't go beyond 199 with the introduction, get my words right, introduction of those parameters. Okay, and next I'd like to touch on the collection tab that you see on this query builder. So far we've talked about those runtime variables and those parameters, both introducing different ways of how we can control our query, refine our query in terms of that view of data that we're looking at. So on the collection tab, again, what I'll I just ran that, but I've removed the company for the moment, the company filter, if you like, just to show another way of doing this by using the collection. So I come onto the collection here, the suggested collection. This is because I'm coming from the customer class. Double click as it says. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a look at the company. See there it says it's looking at company. I'm going to drag that up and I'm going to go is equal to, again, we're using company 1 in my example here. Didn't save it again, but there we go. I'm now looking at a more refined set of data on my query that I'm looking at that. But I might want to go further still. So that's another way of the difference is there I've put that that company code in. So another thing I might like to do in this rather straightforward example is limit down my branches. So of course I could do that by the query here, but I could build it into here as well. So this is going off to another collection. I click on other collection there. What do I want to look at? So this doesn't, I'm about to kind of drill into it, so to speak, but there is a preface here that you have an understanding of the structure. Get my words right eventually. And I'm going to go to all branches, and then within my branches I want my customers. So I'm going to go OK on that. And I'm going to say my code is equal to 01. That's my branch code. There it is there. And because I did the wrong option there earlier, I'm going to have to bring that back. That's my bad. It's equal to 01. But everything's easy. Yeah, I know that's quite straightforward in terms of I made the company 01 as I did earlier and my branch 01. Let's save that and run that, and surprise, surprise, that's what I've got. Let's just have a look. Double click. There's my branch that it's pulling through. Again, there's my branch that's pulling through. So that's just another way of using the query builder to limit or filter my data by doing as much of this as you can. It goes without saying, but you're making it much more efficient in terms of its running. Okay, the other things just to touch on with the query builder is permissions. Again, similar to the view, I can control who can actually see these. I can do it by teams, I can do everybody, or by users. Yep, and we've made super. You can't untick super. The other thing again is we've got these important exports as well as on the query as well as the view. So you can move them around from site to site or from test system to live system. Okay, in this section, I'd like to finish up with areas that I talked about initially on the first slide with all what we've introduced with Query Designer and fill in a couple of gaps that we've got. So first of all, I talked about the queries and the views running through the print and task queue. So this is just a reminder more than anything else. This is my system, remember, my demo system. That's the query there that it's running off. So that's what enables those views and queries to be run through the print and task queue. Back to the query designer, and I'd like to talk about the results viewer. So we've created our views, created our queries, with permissions on those. So what we've got here is And I was too quick there. So remember the last time I ran this query, it was just looking at an individual company and individual branch, and those are the results. This is what the results viewer gives me. So that's a way of limiting what people can just in this screen and providing on those permissions what views and queries they see. And of course, I can still export the results here. Doing the describe gives me the results of what the query is. I'll jump into the manager first. Excuse me, the Query Designer Manager. So this would list out, and I can filter between either queries or views or both. The default is both on. I can search them because I may have quite a list over time. I can import and export from the screen because I can do which ones I want to select. This is also a draw around. That's the one I want, and I go. So that's a way of managing those to see which ones I've got. Over time, this list could potentially become quite long. So therefore, it's important that we introduce some manager concept to be able to see what there is and maintain them. ODB exposure. So again, I give it a name. Now you may have noticed on some of the drop downs that I've got one that I've created earlier. Here it is here. So again, it's based on, just create another one. So record type from customer. What was my view? That's my query. Yeah. And that has simply created the ODB exposure for me. So now I could use MS Query, something like that, to actually view this query through ODBC, giving you another level of inquiry beyond just simply using Query Designer within Greentree. Okay, I'll wrap up by saying almost where I started. If you've got any feedback or questions, please also refer to the release notes which cover this, but also don't hesitate to drop me a line on the email above. Thanks for your time.